Kia ora koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui, kia koutou katoa. Ko Derek Wenmoth tōku ingoa, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all here to this webinar this evening, at least in New Zealand, where we have our guest Julia Atkin waiting in the wings to fill our minds. But look, in recognition of the fact that we have such a group from all over New Zealand here and an Australian, and I see Leslie joining from Africa. I think we'll just start as part of our culture here with karakia. So I just invite you to join me in that. Unihia te pō whirimarama, tamaki te au whatu tangata, tātai ki runga, tātai ki raro, tātai ahurau, homi e, hui e, tai ki e. And welcome for those seeking an interpretation. That karakia actually is a favourite. It was one we developed when I was with Core Education, but I use it tonight because it speaks of out of the confusion might we make some sense and come to a point of agreement. So look, as I said, we've got a good friend and colleague to many of us who are on the call, Julia Atkin, all the way from Australia, right at her mealtime. But welcome here. And Julia, do you want to just greet us from Australia?
Yeah, thanks, Derek, and hi, everyone. I'd just like to acknowledge that I come from the land of Wiradjuri people. I'm currently on the land of the Wiradjuri people, where the farm that I'm now the local custodian for. And I'd just like to pay my respects to all of those who've lived here before me and cared for the place and have now passed on that opportunity to me to continue to care for the land that once had a very rich cultural presence and has left all sorts of signs of that present, which we're now being very active about protecting and honouring. So that's and I'd also like to say though that I'm sort of pretty amazed at you. It's 7 o'clock over there, week 7 in Australia, and the term, I don't know what week it is in New Zealand's term, but in term 4 this time of night and at this stage of the term, take my hat off to you for being prepared and dedicated to come and talk. I wish we could have this more as a workshop, but anyway, Derek and I'll try to make the conversation, it's like you're dropping in or sitting listening to us on a conversation.
Sure. Thanks, Julia. Look, just before I invite Julia to start the conversation, just a couple of things. There is a chat feature in Zoom that it looks like I can see a few of you are using already. And we just invite and encourage you to use that, to have the conversation with each other in the background, to introduce yourself, to make the comments as you will. But there's also a Q&A feature that you can find generally along the bottom there. Q&A is what it's labeled, and that will open up a separate panel that you can enter questions specifically that you'd like for Julia and I to include in the conversation. We may or may not get to all of those, but that's where we would like those questions to go. And so just as we start also, I want to acknowledge and thank the Aotearoa Educators Collective, really, who have brought this together. It's a part of a series that they are running, and I think doing a wonderful job, both in terms of these webinars, but also in terms of the ongoing conversations that they are promoting amongst educators in New Zealand. So with that, back to Julia. I've known Julia for a very long time now. Probably we both represent a similar age and stage in the profession. And we were chatting the other day in preparation for this talk tonight, and realizing really how important it is to reflect on and think about the journey that we've taken as educators. And I think that would be a really good point to start, Julia, for you, perhaps just to talk about, where have you come from in your journey? What is it that's impacted and shaped and formed you as an educator?
Well, actually, just connecting us up, Derek, I think we met in 1997. For those who are wondering how far back we go, at the Methven conference, one of the ones that Magnum Mackey's Chris Chua used to run, if you remember, just the beginning of the ICT strategy in New Zealand. And but if I go back before that, where did I come from? How did I come to be in New Zealand? Basically, I've got a chemistry background, but had decided that I had postgraduate degree in chemistry, but decided that I want to live in a rural area in Australia with my late husband. And so once I chose that, I thought, okay, so what am I going to do with a master's in chemistry? Teaching seemed like a good thing to do. And I was sort of a bit disposed to enjoy teaching and tutoring anyway. But anyway, so long story, but I ended up in the US at Cornell University. John had gone over there playing rugby, of all things, as New Zealanders would appreciate. That's an important reason to take you somewhere else. And so he ended up at Cornell University. And when I finished my master's, I went over to meet up with him. Anyway, I don't want to get all the details of the story. But the key thing there was, and this is what may be really hard for those in the group that are younger to appreciate, but back in the 70s, which is what that was, when that was, we were actually still caught up in learning theory that was shaped by behaviorism. Like reward them, they'll do it again, punish them, they won't. It was sort of like the precursor to totally everything being one size fits all, explicit direct instruction type approach, very narrow view, and very much equating us with rats, really. That view was. And there were a group at Cornell who were starting to ask questions about learning and how does our mind work? How can we, they're all science educators, see. So for me to be a good teacher, I thought, well, I have to understand the process of learning. If I can't understand how people learn, I've got no way of knowing how to affect, what's happening for them as learner. Anyway, end up doing a doctorate in looking at how people think and learn in the early days of cognitive science. I think the term was coined when I was there at Cornell. But anyway, following that though, I sort of came back to Australia in 81 and started teaching in my local school in Canberra and then my local school. And I suddenly thought, what the hell? I've been sitting in an ivory tower dreaming up how people learn, but I haven't actually talked to the learners and I haven't actually had anything to do with their context. I mean, it'd been a long time before that I'd been in high school and I was teaching in a high school at the time. And so that was the beginning of me saying, well, hang on a sec. When we're looking at evidence of what makes a difference in learning, we have to engage learners talking about that. It doesn't come from a sort of very removed study that's done somewhere under these conditions to come up with impact, effect sizes or whatever. And I thought, no, it's too removed. And then that was actually spurred on a little bit more when one day I was presenting to a group and I started to state a definition of knowledge. And someone in the audience who I knew very well, still a very close friend, said to me, Julia, why are you telling us? Why aren't you asking us? And that actually changed the way that I totally went, the combined things totally changed the way I went about what I was doing in the way that I was working both with kids, with teachers in the schools I was at. It's how do we get the collective dialogue going? And as we called the night, leveraging personal and professional insights for authentic practice, because after 40 years of working here, or 40 something now, in education field in Australia and New Zealand, I just absolutely convinced that that's where our way forward lies. It does not lie in someone else telling us what to do. And whether you want to come in on that, Derek, before I
well, I'm preparing my next question in my mind, but I just have to say it resonates with me. I was just working in a school today where I've just finished a whole lot of interviewing students alongside some of the other staff. We've been gathering all of their insights together. And it was really interesting. This school, they've been doing a lot of really good stuff, teachers really devoted, but even through the insights from students, some things really surprised them. Like quite a number of students were saying, we're really not sure about why we're learning the things that we're being taught, or what it is that we really need to demonstrate to show that we're getting there. And so the teachers sitting there thinking they'd planned well and had all of that there, but it wasn't until they learned and listened and thought about the feedback from students. So I tautoko what you're saying. And I guess the question that comes from this, so is that something you think that we're sort of lost sight of? Do you think it needs to be happening more? What's that making you think for the present?
Well, I think that we have lost sight of it. Oh, and that's my experience. When I've been a little bit out of the scene for the last few years, or not, the last year I've been around, but a few years before that, I've been out of the scene for a little while. And what I found was when I started going back working directly with teachers in schools is that some of the things I took for granted about the thinking about learning and knowing weren't there. And I thought, oh, and then I thought about the fact that if you look back to when we first met in the 90s, it was the fall of the Berlin Wall, the internet, World Wide Web, all coming on, millennium around the corner. Everyone was sort of excited and thinking about how the world was changing. and how learning was going to be the key capability we needed. Learning how to learn was going to be a key capability. But there was a buzz and an excitement about that at the time because that was the era, if you know what I mean. So we had a lot of dialogue, a lot of discussion that was stimulated by that. But then what I found, but I'm not saying schools were all therefore up and running and really doing that, but there was a general feel. Like I think when, you know, the NavCon conferences were going on, the ICT work, NavCon, which turned into ULearn and you starting core and all of those things, it was a real buzz and it was very much driven by educators. So what I'd like to do is talk through a little bit about sort of like what I've come to understand has actually not helped and it's still not helping in helping us move forward on what I believe as educators we all can access if we haven't already accessed that as something to take us through. So let me just share slides, and Derek, please, Derek and I have a commitment for him butting in when I talk too long so he can make it more interactive. But I just want to share my screen. Hopefully I've got it. And you should be able to see, it takes a bit of time to come up, I think. You should be able to see some
We've got that.
You got it?
Yep.
And I'm just going to go into presentation mode, which sometimes then takes a bit longer to come up. So let me know when it seems to have done that. Yep.
Done it now.
Yeah. Okay, great. All right. So I'm going to move it here though. So when I'm looking at you when I'm talking, only now I've lost you, Derek. Sorry, too many screens. Yeah. Sorry, guys. Move that one. Probably won't let me move it. Yes, it will. Okay. So, all right. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about the learnings, and I'd love to have, you know, the conversation going, but Derek, you'll have to speak for everybody.
Yeah.
So essentially, what happened when I first came back to Australia and started teaching, I had never been in a secondary school staff room. And so here I was with supposedly all my theories about how kids learn. But basically, I was in a situation where I tried doing something with a class, a group, kids, and it really didn't work. I mean, basically, it was terrible. It just fell flat, and I thought, oh my God, I'm supposed to know about learning. How do I design this learning so they're engaged and they're asking questions and they're thinking? So I went home and dreamt up another possibility. Went up at lunchtime into the staff room where we had, you know, lunch together. And I sat down, I raved on to the person next to me about how amazing it was, what the kids had done, da, 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 da. And someone, you know, that basically most people were fairly polite around me and just like were eating their lunch and just listening. But there was a guy sitting opposite me reading a paper. And after about 5 minutes, he said, "You won't last." And I thought, holy hell, what makes him like that? You know, what is it that's causing him to be so cynical? And so then what happened was I'm just giving you a bit of my personal professional journey between then and
just while you're doing that, Julia, we're getting a lot of people say they can't see the slides. We've got a big picture of your desktop and a little picture of you, but we can't see the slides since you moved them off. Sorry.
Rightio. So what's that mean? Oh, can I put it onto the one? Can they see them now?
No. Yeah. You just need to make that big, really.
Well, it is big here. So
okay.
Wait a minute, I'll just stop sharing and come back. Sorry.
That's good.
Yeah, I'll move it here and I'll share that desktop rather than I may not be able to see you, Derek, so you'll definitely have to.
That's fine. You'll hear me.
Yeah, okay. Desktop one.
I'm sorry to interrupt your story.
No, go for it. Okay. Can they now see the screen? With
yep.
the slots? 81 to 24? Yep.
It's the one that's up there says personal journey at the moment. Yeah, 81 to 24. Got it.
Yeah, great. Okay. All right. So basically, in that moment, I thought, what's making him so cynical? And then as I went on, I got more and more of that. I call it the been there, done that syndrome. You know, like, you know, you're not going to last. Been there, done that. And I started to search for, I thought, why are they like that? What are they doing? Why, you know, what's their experience that means they have that attitude? But surely we all want kids to learn. It just seemed weird. It didn't seem to fit. But then as I went on, I realized that this, what I call the shiny object, simplistic solution, bandwagon approach to school development was coming about because as leaders and teachers, we were what I call outsourcing your thinking. Rather than thinking for ourselves and thinking about and talking to the learners and other teachers, we were getting someone else to tell us about it. So it was sort of like this, that from this was really everything that was coming at people was what you should do. What, you know, it's at the time it was a big debate between phonics and whole language. Well, guess what we're still doing? And it's as if it's an either or. It's either phonics or it's whole language rather than, you know, and it was all about what you should be doing and telling you what to do rather than being driven from where you know, from where you were coming from in terms of what you really valued and believed about learning. And so I can sort of remember the moment in a school in Goulburn, actually, where I suddenly sort of twigged to what the dynamic was. And so from then on, really, all my work's been about how do we get people to share what we're really trying to do? What are we really trying to do here? Whatever the moment. Big picture, like in South Australia at the moment, they're very clear about the state education purpose, but it's also what do we value and believe? But it goes all the way down to me as an individual educator. And then from that, well, in principle, what am I going to do? There is, in my language, there is no such thing as best practice because it depends on the context. In a context I'm in, it may be really important that I'm giving very explicit instruction, but to another kid, it may not be that at all. So the context is going to shift what I do. I have to be responsive to what the context is. So to say best practice to me is problematic. It's if there's one practice, one answer for all. So so the pressure was coming at people from the outside. And when that happens, they're highly unlikely to be sustainable because as soon as that practice has been around for a while, someone will be suggesting something else, and then that'll become the bright, shiny object. So recently, for example, I was working with a group of leaders and they were talking about what they were focusing on at the school at the moment. And I said, well, last time we were together, you had a big focus on success criteria. Are you still doing that? Oh, well, no, that was sort of last year. And so if the practice was important in terms of what they were trying to achieve, it should never leave. It should become an embedded part of practice. And so, and I think the best one, you know, when it's sort of coming at you from the outside, and what tends to happen is it becomes a rule and you get inauthentic practice. And what's worse, you get goal misalignment. And I guess the best example for me for that, of taking it outside education for a minute, in Poland many years ago, they wanted to up the export of Polish furniture. So they said, okay, if we're going to put money in to help this happen, what are going to be our KPIs? You know, how are we going to, what are our key performance indicators? So their key performance indicator was going to be the weight of Polish furniture that was exported. Well, guess what happened? In 5 years, Polish furniture became the heaviest in the world. So it wasn't actually about exporting more, you know, and getting more dollars. It was actually about, it was measured by something that wasn't the goal they were after at all. And so this is what happens over and over again in, and has done in education. Like, anyway, recently we're doing an analysis of our literacy and numeracy stuff in Australia, and it should never be looked at on a across the board process, because if we look at individuals, we need to see what's going on. Anyway, some of you will be looking at this and think, oh, there's Simon Sinek's golden circles. Well, I don't really care who had them first, but I know that I published my work before his, but it doesn't matter if they work, that's the most important thing. So so what I really have found is the pendulum swing that's worried me throughout my 40 years has come about because we're not stopping and thinking. So if someone suggests something to you, and Derek, I'd like you to talk about, if you wouldn't mind, talk about how you would approach it. Not necessarily a specific example, but how you would go about. I know you've got a recent mandate over there that you've now got to have a certain amount of time spent on literacy, numeracy, or whatever it is that you're required to do. So I haven't kept up with all the details. But if we were to ask the why question about that, how would we do that? How would we go through it? So we're not just spending more time and getting the heaviest furniture in the world or spending the most time in the world on literacy, but getting the outcomes we want, which is actually improving kids' literacy. So Derek, can you tell me a little bit about how you'd go about that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Julia, and I think many people on the call tonight will have that resonating because, as you say, we're in that end of the pendulum at the moment where we're being told what to do in terms of structured literacy, structured maths, spend an hour a day to address it, and now the NCEA, you know, taking away level 1 as if that's going to be the panacea. So it's very rules-based, but an example from practice just earlier this week in another school I was at, where the staff were feeling under the pressure of, for instance, of the hour a day thing, and so they were looking at their timetable to see how that was going to work. With 15 hours a day just spent doing the structured maths, literacy, writing sort of thing. And so I prompted them to start thinking, well, why do you think this mandate's been put there? What's driving it? And it was almost like that took them into a whole different plane to understand, well, it's because the ministry's told us to. Yes, but why? Why is the minister saying that? And bit by bit, we in a good-hearted way started to unpack and understand where the messaging was coming about, a decline in achievement rates, data that was showing that it wasn't up to spec, feedback from employers, this sort of thing, even feedback that they had from their own communities. And I say, so what is the situation in your school? What does your data show you? How do you feel you're going? And by the time we'd finished the conversation and getting right back to it, they were talking about their own personal beliefs, because the frustration that they were feeling was being, in their case, contributed to by the clash, the tension with work that they'd been putting in as a school around their own beliefs about what makes for effective teaching and learning, and seeing all of these things that they wanted to be able to do with their students squeezed into just 10 hours of a week that was left. So it was kind of a reverse engineering process. But as we went right back to the heart and they identified, so there is an issue that we need to address about achievement. We need to be more rigorous and think about how we might measure that, but we don't want to let go of our beliefs about what makes for really good and engaging teaching and learning. How can we build out from that so that actually our focus isn't on whether or not we meet the hour a day, but our focus is on what are we doing to ensure that our students are meeting the expectations we have for them, which includes the achievement and literacy. Probably took a good half a day, that conversation, but it was a worthwhile one.
Yeah, and that's the key to me, is that it's actually emphasizing whatever is. I mean, there'll always be things put at you from the outside, whether it's parent pressure or whatever, ministry pressure, whatever. There'll be always things. So the key is not that you can't ignore them, and you can't expect that they'll go away. They won't. They've been around for 40 years. I can't see them going anytime soon. So the key thing then is not that, that the fact that they are there, it's what you do with it. So that why question, why would we want to spend X amount of time on that? And so that it doesn't end up like, I remember when there was way back, probably in the 90s, there was a literacy block thing introduced in Australia. And, I remember one teacher saying to me that she just observed another teacher in her school when a kid had arrived, like a joy in their eyes, and they had a tortoise in their arms. And it was like, the other teacher said, put that away, we've got literacy block. And I'm thinking, holy hell, what an opportunity to go into the literature around that, to use it as something that's already motivating a kid. But because they were responding to a rule, they hadn't thought through. So if you're going to do the why, it's really about being responsive to the context, but you've got to be clear about what you value and believe first. So rather than just talk about, this is an idea, what I thought I'd do is just take you through a couple of, because in this 40 years, it's a pretty very long time, one of the things I've done is definitely developed some meta studies, but the meta studies have come from listening to stories that I've then synthesized. So I want to share some of that, because this is what actually convinced me about where we need to be looking for our answers is in the people we work with, the parents, the teachers, and the learners. And so I'm going to actually, this is the sort of question you need to ask, but we've got to do this head and heart work. So how do we do it? I suppose I'll leave those on the slides. Oh, I'm sorry, before I do that, just to acknowledge, I'm certainly not the only one who's saying this. Look at Helen Timperley's quote from Timperley, L, and Lefebvre a while ago. Practice and change in practice need to be considered holistically as products of teachers and leaders' beliefs, values, experiences, and knowledge. So adopting practice is not enough to truly improve. So there's nothing new on what I'm saying. So how about I try to engage us in doing some of that, so that the strength of the approach, because I do remember when I first started using that model that I developed, that people said, yeah, Joe, we know what you're talking about, but we don't know how to do it. So I thought, okay, well, why don't we do it? And in the meantime, strengthen some of our thinking about a number of things. So one of the questions I've asked, probably over 200,000 people in the 40 years I've been at this, what are the characteristics of an effective teacher? So I'm going to actually ask you individually, I mean, you're probably most of you on your own anyway, but to actually think of a person who is an effective teacher for you, not simply someone you liked, but someone who had a positive impact on your learning. You learned well. And it may or may not have been a formal teacher. It could have been a parent, it could have been a colleague, a friend, doesn't matter. Just that as a result of the interaction with that person, you learnt more effectively. And then think about what was it about them that made him or her an effective teacher for you. And I'm literally going to pause for a few minutes because I want you to do the thinking on this before I say any more.
And I could put that into the chat so that we can just see
that'd be great.
the responses. I can feed it back to you, Julia. So yeah, please use the chat, everybody, to consider the characteristic that, as Julia's suggested.
So Derek, rather than feed them back to me, if you people can sort of listen at the same time as jotting a few more things in, what I'll
keep it going.
Keep Derek to do is, as I put up what I've learned from the many stories, is how does that resonate with what's appearing in the chat. So
Julia, just as you start, there's a pattern coming through here about passion, about enthusiasm, about making people in the class feel seen. There's quite a consistent message.
Yeah. All right. So, okay. So, sorry, I'll go from here. So what happened what I did, for those of you who are trying to understand how I did this meta-analysis, I'm obviously taking off a few people who get stuck into meta-analyses, but basically what I did was I'd listen and then I'd come up with with a concept map for it. And then as I listened to more stories, the people in the audience would help me refine the concept maps. And this is what emerged, and probably doesn't get much change now. Maybe it's built out a bit, but essentially the big message that comes through about what effective teaching is that it results in the growth of a person. They're not talking about higher literacy scores, they're not talking about higher whatevers, they're talking about the person grew. And then if I look at what emerged, there seem to be two main threads that get woven together. One of those is about, and I'm thinking of the teacher orchestrating this, if you like, or setting up the conditions in which this happens. So one is definitely about developing relationship or relationships. And you say, well, what impacted, the other one, sorry, is around designing the learning experiences. So on one hand, it's the sort of like the human relational side, and the other side, it is about intentional design of learning for the learning outcomes you're going after. And so in the relationship side, what comes out, so I ended up sort of these two things, both developing relationships and creating, designing learning, end up creating the conditions for learning. And so in which you're probably mostly unconsciously going about. The relationships part I call the human spirit dimension, and mainly because of what people have said about it. And then the learning environment was more like the conditions, like you'd mentioned a moment ago about being motivated, or the teacher was passionate and enthusiasm. That's sort of the conditions that are created. And this bit about guiding the learning process. So when Derek asked me before what my journey was, I didn't take much notice of these first two before I started doing this work with teachers and learners, right? When I was actually doing my own research, it was very focused over here. I wanted to know what I had to do as a science teacher to help kids to develop deep meaning in science, so that knowledge, understanding went with them for life. That was what my goal was. So my focus was very much about how do I help that happen in their minds, right? So then I came back to Australia and started asking people, I started teaching in a school where the kids were totally disengaged, wouldn't even come into science class, let alone me try to help them understand it. And so I learned from those kids how to create the conditions for learning. And so how do I design the learning environment, which I'll speak more about. But then since then, talking with the hundreds of thousands of people since, I've learned so much more about the human spirit dimension. a dimension that I was actually taking for granted. And I found that you cannot take it for granted because it's probably the most powerful of the three dimensions. And in this, it's about developing relationships that demonstrate mutual respect and what they do and provide models. But what is a result of that? It actually helps build a sense of self, protects a sense of self, and it provides security. Funnily enough, I go right back to the 90s when I first used to ask this question. I had unconditional love here, but people have had trouble using the term love in the early 90s. Can you believe that? Anyway, that just shows what our age group's like, Derek. But the Greek term agape, or giving of self, selfless love, is the term that eventually came through to describe the nature of the teacher role. No wonder you're all exhausted at the end of a term, end of a year, because there is, you give of yourself constantly to learners and to each other. And so that is expressed through acknowledgement. Someone said earlier about, feeling that they were known in the classroom, or they were present. They weren't a number. They weren't a quiet wallflower. They were acknowledged for who they were. It used to have acceptance here, but that had a tone of, I'll tolerate you, or I'll put up with you. What acknowledgement is much more powerful about. It's about actually acknowledging who you are. And my intent as a teacher to help you become who you can be. That was what comes through on the acknowledgement part. And then the belief in capacity to learn. So the interesting one about the care and concern, again, going back to that era, it was coming through pretty much like a little bit warm, fuzzy, like caring, well, it came out, I think, in our generation of trying to get past the sort of domineering parent type thing, or domineering teacher, and saying, oh, we've got to care for kids. Yes, you do, but what they most need to help them is, yes, you care, yes, you acknowledge them, but you expect that they will. That you're actually going to challenge them. You're going to set high expectations and encourage them to set high expectations. And that you also then have the demonstrated belief in their capacities to do that. So this bit here, I think, Derek, from when you mentioned that was obviously some of the stuff coming through on the Q&A, right? Around this dimension.
Yep.
Pretty powerfully.
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
Absolutely, very powerfully.
Yeah. Okay. So let's look at, you might ask, well, why did I not focus on that in the beginning? I'm a bit ignorant. Well, partly it was because I was one of those kids at school who everything came easily to me, but it didn't matter if it was sport or relationships with others, kids, or learning, except for when I look at it lately or later, I think, yeah, well, I'm a pretty secure learner and a high sense of self. But if you were to ask me now to learn to sing, I would be desperate for a relationship with a mentor, educator, who could actually give me a sense of security and let me take risks and all of those things. Because I don't believe I can do it. I need someone that actually can help me do it. And so again, it's not a one size fits all, and in different contexts, this becomes more powerful than others. But it's most powerful when the learner doesn't believe in themselves, or they've got a tentative belief in self. So what about the conditions? What comes out there? Well, on that one, oops, sorry, that's my most famous person story, which I'll go past because I'm looking at the time, and there are a couple of things I might come back to in a sec. So I think the conditions that are created, one of the things that comes through from everybody always about effective learning, intrinsic motivation is the ace. If you're intrinsically motivated, then you'll get a higher sense of achievement, you'll be engaged, all of those things. So if I am trying to help kids learn something and I know they don't find it intrinsically interested, I've got to work out how I can provoke it, how I can, all that language we used about inquiry, how you can sort of like tune into it, how you can sort of set them a challenge that they can't resist, all of those things that we've got to do to ignite their intrinsic motivation. And from that, though, when they get a sense of achievement from something they've done, that causes a feedback loop, which raises more motivation. And you need to have appropriate resources. And the other thing, one of the things that's happened since I did this work, the neuroscience now backs it up. Every time I come back to any of the things I learned from all the hundreds of thousands of people I work with, I then say, okay, what's neuroscience got to say about this? And they say exactly the same. And if you look at the PISA data, from 2022, I don't know what New Zealand's was around well-being, or relationships, but when there's a very strong correlation between academic outcomes or achievement, if you like, and kids who said high achievement have a relationship with their teachers. Those that had low achievement, no relationship with their teachers, or poor relationship with their teachers. So None of this is rocket science. It's actually already present in our experiences. So the environment one, which fosters ownership and self-direction and thinking about your thinking and learning and knowing yourself as a learner, but one that's non-judgmental, encourages you to see, like productive failure. You have a go and it wasn't quite there, but that's okay because I've learned from that and I'm going to continually have a go at improving. So I don't think any of this is news to any of you when you see it, but it's what actually comes forward. And the last one here, and I want to come into this from another angle in a minute, is about designing the learning. So you're not only analysing the required thinking processes, but the acquired learning process. I'm going to come back to that in a sec. The required learning processes for the type of learning outcome you're after. And how do you stimulate the whole person learning, all the ways they have of knowing. And then making sure we've got effective, this is where effective strategies come in. If this is what I'm trying to get to, what sort of strategy? I'm intentionally trying to get here. What sort of strategy is going to help that? And then evaluating that. Did the strategy, did it work for what we were trying to do, if it was understanding or whatever? And of course, the learning is purposeful and personally meaningful. So I don't think there are any surprises in that at all. But I guess the thing that I'd encourage you to do with teachers and parents and learners is actually to really talk about this. Get your own theory of what an effective teacher is. And be that something that you're saying, okay, well, then in principle, what are we doing to develop these relationships? What are we doing to design their learning more effectively? And what about the conditions? How are we going about that? So anything coming out of the Q&A, Derek, that you'd like to throw in?
There's a few comments in here that just support what you're saying, but I think a personal comment, Julia, that captures some of that is what I've always loved about the work that you do and the conversations we've had about this goes back to, you call it effective teaching. And of course, the word that is thrown around everywhere is the notion of pedagogy. And pedagogy often gets put in a box. We are a constructivist or a behaviorist or whatever. But my personal understanding of the word pedagogy goes right back to that notion of the art and science of teaching, and some would even add craft. And as I review and listen to you over and over, that's exactly what you're explaining here. It is not just the science of teaching, and it's not just an art form. It is the combination of all of those things that make it powerful and effective, especially with what you've got at the bottom. We need to know that there's going to be growth. All right. So
that growth might be in self-belief. It may not be
yes.
actually the outcome you're after. And I remember actually working at what was called Unlimited, but now part of our Tafiti many years ago, in their very early days. And and the teachers was a new experience for them to be teaching in a school like that. And one of them said, "Oh, I just lament the fact that these kids aren't taking advantage at that early stage and not taking advantage of these opportunities we're putting in front of them." And oh my God. And then the next minute, one of the staff came in and said, "Oh, there's a phone call for you." And he went out to the phone call and he came back and said, "Oh my God, I've got to start all over again." And what he said was, "Here I am lamenting the fact that they're not racing off to do this big learning experience I had in mind." He said, "But that was the kid's mother ringing me to thank me, because for the first time in ages, this kid was getting out of bed, having a shower, having breakfast, and going to school." And so that enormous step forward for that kid, you're not going to see it immediately in a literacy score, but boy, is that sort of part of the process or the guide to being able to go further and to keep learning. And so that's the richness of this. And it sort of, I know that in the last one when you were talking with Guy, there is this sort of unfortunate use of the term, the science of learning. Well, if you look at this, the most preferred term for me is the learning sciences, which include cognitive science, social science, they include anthropology, they include neuroscience, they include educational psychology. It comes from all the angles. And you look at the complexity of this, you need to know a lot about human relationships and be able to work with that and be able to be a good action researcher to see what's happening when you design things and getting feedback. And it's incredibly complex art and science that we're involved.
So a question's come up here, Julia, which I think is going to be on the mind of a number of people. And what you're describing probably warms the heart of many people listening. And yet, coming back to that early part of your talk about the external factors that are pressing us. So one of those is the whole idea of focusing on sequential learning, that there is a sequence we must follow. What are your thoughts on that in terms of what you've just portrayed here?
Okay, well, what I'm going to do is when I know this is recording, so the slides will be the ones that are recorded, I mean, on that, but I'll send through the PowerPoint because I can see I'm not going to do some things I thought I might do. So, but there is one thing that I want to do, and it's actually, I want to address that question, but in a slightly roundabout way, because one of the things I wanted to do, sorry, got to get this to behave itself now and do what I want it to do. One of the things I wanted to do is talk more about the nature of learning. And so I'm going to come into that to, what's this one? I'm just going to try and find it. Yeah, so and there are some slides there that'll take you through. What about if you were really trying to, like we did with effective teaching, you're trying to understand the nature of learning? Well, there's some slides there that can take you through that. But what I want to get to is that if you look at what learning is all about, it's all about, I mean, the human being is driven to learn. I'm watching my 20-month-old, not even 20-month-old, 16-month-old grandson at the moment. And the way that he is just curious and driven to explore everything. We wouldn't survive as a human being or and you know, if you go back to our animal days, if we weren't curious and if we didn't investigate and try to find things. Okay, so if I look overall, learning, if I'm a bit like the effective teaching, well, what is learning? If I say the very big thing, a process leading to change in the individual, which allows them to either perceive something differently, adapt to their behavior or their emotions, perform in some way, to create or recreate. Right now, when we learn, the process you can gain factual information. You can develop understanding and insights. You can develop skills, psychomotor, interpersonal, intellectual, and you no doubt develop values, beliefs, and attitudes, right? Dispositions, if you like. So when you look at that, when we come to know as a result of learning, there are different types of knowledge. And unfortunately, people tend to lump them all in one basket. Let's look at factual information. That's all about knowing what. If you look at understanding ideas, insights and ideas, it's knowing why. Why is the sky blue rather than pink or something else? And knowing how is how to do things, whether it's skills, whether it's psychomotor, or it could be a cognitive skill for that matter, thinking skill. And then the personal meaning bit, what's this got to do with me? And so the last slide about effective teaching indicates that you've got to be heading to this for kids, otherwise you'll lose them and they'll just be doing what I call chew and spew or drill and kill. So basically we want to, but we do need to think about what's the difference between, if I do want kids to know factual information, I have good reason for it perhaps, but I do want them to understand, I do want them to know how's that differ? Well, this is where neuroscience is really helpful, because different regions of the brain are involved in these different ways of knowing. Right. So in factual information, it's what they call declarative memory. And if you want to know, like as a chemist, I wanted to know not the first 21 elements or 20 elements. I wanted to know elements in groups, like going down the groups, because then I knew how they'd behave. So group one all have similar, that's why they're in group one in the periodic table, because they all behave the same way. And I wanted to be able to, just without having to go and find the periodic table, know what elements were there. So when I wanted to know what, declarative knowledge, and get automaticity about that, I did all the things that you should do. Like you start with just 3: lithium, sodium, potassium, lithium, sodium, potassium, lithium, sodium, potassium. Said it over and over and over till it became like a chunk. Lithium, sodium, potassium was one chunk. Then add rubidium, cesium, francium. Added that, and then the whole lot. Now that was very deliberate process, because I wanted, and I knew why I wanted, that factual information to be automatic. What about know why? Just look about this for a minute. You can say to someone, I can give you information, and then if they want them to have that information stored for themselves, they're going to have to act like that tape recorder, like I just did. And that's how they could actually, and they would embed that factual information in their memory, in their declarative memory. And there's a region of the brain that responds to that. Trouble with it is that it's actually very fragile. It disappears easily unless you keep using it. And as a chemist, I did keep using the stuff I recited. I did keep using it. So therefore it's now in long-term memory, and it'll stay there for me because I occasionally still need to use it. But when it comes to know why, do you say to someone, I'm going to give you understanding? That's ridiculous. You don't say that. You say, I'll help you develop understanding. So what that's telling you, even in our own language, is that understanding something that's got to be developed in the learner's mind, not the teacher's mind. So I have this understanding about the nature of group 1 elements, for example, but how am I going to get kids to understand that and develop that meaning, make those connections in their own mind? And when you get to, and looking at the neuroscience, this is where what's really fascinating about that, it's about connecting your personal story knowledge, which is episodic memory, and also semantic memory, which is where all the connections and all the things that you synthesize, like my stories now about teaching and learning, that you synthesize out of all your experiences, that's your semantic memory. And that's the thing that connects it all up and allows you to take an idea that I've learned here and use it somewhere that you've never seen before. And of course, we want that for kids. You can Google the answer to the diameter, the area of a circle with a radius of 4.5 meters in faster than I can actually say it. You can always get the answer. So that's not what we're after in terms of the relationship between the circumference of a circle and the area, if you like, or the circumference of the circle and the radius, etc. So we want them to see the relationship and then know there's an explicit formula for it. Okay, so I'm raving on here, but I really want to make sure that we understand these different ways of knowing need different sorts of learning processes. So the know-how bit is very much, it's a procedural side of memory. It's different from the declarative one. So if I'm going to try and improve my golf swing, I definitely need someone to explicitly instruct me on what I'm doing wrong, give me the feedback, and then demonstrate to me how to do that. So I absolutely need that to develop know-how. And it actually lasts longer than declarative memory. This procedural memory does. Anyway, and of course, it's all going to help when it's all got something to do with me and I'm motivated to know it. And then when it's integrated and internalized. So what I want to get at with this, because really thinking about learning, we are as human beings driven to make meaning from our experience. That's the understanding. That's all the stories and things I've experienced. It sort of develops my window on the world. I develop these mental maps. So if I think back to 97, which was actually my second trip to New Zealand, but my first trip in terms of education, and I think about how that map has changed and developed through all the experiences I've had while I've been over there. But I also, I believe, develop a bag of tricks for taking action. All right, so now I'm going to set you a challenge in a bit of the time we've got remaining. So I'm just talking about that whole process. I want you to imagine that you've got to learn. Oopsie, bad idea. That one, Julia. I hope I went too quickly. Okay, so I want a challenge for you is to learn how to learn that code. So those shapes correspond to the letters. All right. Now, if I was asking you to learn that code, if you did it the way I was talking about with the lithium, sodium, potassium, I could probably shut my eyes, take a photo of the first three, then test myself, try a few more, test myself, add them on, do this. Would I do it in 3 minutes? Unlikely. So at the end of 3 minutes, would you be able to translate that? Unlikely. It has actually got bad idea. And it's what that code is actually for, is bad idea. So, but what about if we go another way and we look for a pattern? In that code, is there a pattern? Can anyone see a pattern? Maybe someone will be able to see it and jump it into the Q&A. Anything arriving? Not at this time.
Nothing coming at the minute, but I'd carry on and I'll feed back.
Yeah, okay. All right, well, now let's have a look. And you can start checking yourself against the others. All right, so once you have a pattern, or you have a concept, if you like, or in this case, a pattern for the code, what do you have to remember? You just have to remember that alphabetical order and it's tic-tac-toe and you wrote across. So there's no cognitive load in that. No cognitive load in that at all. So all the stuff, and I've got a book in front of me at the moment, Ollie Lovell's one on cognitive load theory. And some of the stuff I read in there I find really problematic because it's not getting clear about what's the meaning that I'm going after. How can I get that meaning? And then how can I generate the code, if you like? And so that's the bit that I think just be careful when you're reading about the science of learning, that it's not, if I go back to where I looked at the slide where we're looking at all the different aspects, the know how, the know what, the know why, and what's got to do with me, there's far more to it than just knowing the what and how to go about doing that's really important. So I'm going to try to, anything you want to say, Derek, before I want to get for the punchline for me, which is not either or, it's both.
Yeah, I was just conscious of the time, but I do want to throw in. There's a comment made by Francis online here that I just want to read to you and get your response to, because it seems to be pertinent. She says, so the key is to be sure you don't sacrifice the individual learning experiences and how each learner works when you are responding to the government requirements. They should be made to fit the learner, not the learner fit the program.
Absolutely, Francis. Yeah, so that's why it's like, what am I going to do with that compulsory time? And it may not who says it has to be a block? It might be spread throughout the day. But and even, is the time going to be the measure, or is the improvement in their learning the measure? And what are the strategies I'm going to use in order to help them move from where they are to another step? And the learners, your kids, and the complexity of the fact that you're thinking about who they are and who they are in the group, and your relationship with them and their relationship with their their peers and so on. So I remember once saying to my late husband, who was a veterinarian, I said, God, veterinary science is so complex compared with medicine, because you've got so many species, everything from a ferret to a snake. And he said, yes, but I've only got to deal with one at a time. You've got to deal with 25 or 30 at a time. And it made me realize just how complex in that moment. Not only do we need to understand what it is we want kids to learn and help them, how to go about designing for that, but we've really got to be able to take all the individual differences into account. And if we try a one size fits all, we're not likely to get anywhere with that approach. And so, I think Francis's comment is spot on. So let me just do this one again. It's all alluding to the same thing, really, that it's about very intentional design, and it's about very intentionally in relation to your learners. And if there's one thing that I employ, apart from not outsourcing your thinking, the other thing I'd employ you to do is to, whenever you think one either or, stop and say, well, hang on a sec, how can it be both and? Because this is part of the dilemma. In Western thinking, and I'm sure it's not, when I look at Maori, and I can never say it properly, so I won't try, but my plain Aussie English translation of Proverbs, I'm just struck by the spirit and sense of wholeness that's always there in them. And they're not either or. It's not either or. It's a both and philosophy. And we need to have Western science come out of the days of Aristotle and others who separated things to get clarity, but in the separation, they then ended up making it really hard. So I believe we've become caught in the either or. It's either this or it's that. Whereas we really got to go after. It's like these things are actually, it was like this or that. And I'm saying, no, these are nested. It's not one or the other, it's both. So a true constructive approach says there is a place for direct explicit instruction, just saying, okay, that's one approach. But ultimately where I want to get kids to get to is being able to respond to open questions and complex problems, or and holistic, authentic tasks. That's where I want to get them to, where they initiate, negotiate, choose, direct, and I'm just facilitating. But I can assure you, no group of kids I've ever taught were all ready for that. So I need times to be able to give direct explicit instruction and model with scaffolds about, and be providing scaffolds to help them even when I've actually done something explicitly. And I need to be able to nudge, prompt, question, and give formative feedback in order to get them to the point where they can do that. So when I'm giving direct explicit instruction, I'll go here, I'm just jumping through a bit. What learning and thinking behaviours are required for the learners in each of these modes of teaching? Well, direct explicit instruction, oh my God, learner follows instructions. I do, you do, we do. Well, that doesn't, and then if one of the kids can already do it, what are they doing? Sitting twiddling their thumbs like I do, we do, you do. So I have to be more nuanced than that in terms of how we do it. But if I'm looking at when I am wanting to explicitly instruct something, the learner will follow instructions. That's how they need to have a go at it. Then when they wanting to provide scaffolds, they're going to try and apply it with my support and nudging. Then I want them to be able to initiate action, where I'm going to give them formative feedback, so I can keep guiding them to get towards where I want them to go, where they initiate, negotiate, choose, direct, evaluate. This is the sort of zenith, if you like. So then if we then say, okay, but how do I know where to work? Well, that's all to do with the learner, as Francis said. So what's going to direct it? Knowing my learners, their identity as learners, their self-efficacy, their sense of self-efficacy, what they understand now and where we want to try and help grow that understanding, their competence. And it's also my knowledge, but it's also my intentionality. What are the desired learning outcomes? Am I after know how, know what, know why, or what's this got to do with them? Where am I focusing it? And therefore, what sort of strategy or approach am I? So some things are learnable, some things are instructable. It's not, I can't instruct someone as to why the sky is blue. They won't understand. That's learnable. I can't instruct someone to be empathetic, but I can help them learn to be. So it's really good to distinguish between those. And then I design the culture of my learning space or whatever, and the strategies to get where I'm trying to go. And I talk to the kids about it. So Leslie, great to hear you coming in from Ghana. And when I talk about making explicit to the learners, thinking back to your Red Beach days and the great work you did there with the learner qualities that's gone on now through Stonefields and whatever. So, and it's also about being responsiveness. So identifying the teachable moment, which is teachable for one kid, but not another necessarily. Helping them be self-directing. They have to be able to tell you where they're at. So self-reflection, metacognition, them identifying their needs, articulating that need. And then a formative assessment or formative feedback. I think I've got the Q&A thing sitting on that screen, so I'll get it out of the way. The formative assessment and feedback being the key thing that I'm going to do from there. And so these are nested strategies, not either or. They're very, very well intentionally used depending on the needs of the learner. So given what I think we're almost right on 7 o'clock there, Derek. So what the last slide comes up to be that, if we want this transformative learning, then here's how to design, here are the key design elements. Again, this is not Julia's work. This is the work of thousands and thousands of schools and teachers that I've worked with over the last 40 years, where they've helped me come to be able to put all this. So I don't share my story, actually. I share the story of everyone that I've worked with. And now the key message that comes with that, your task as an educator is not to put knowledge where knowledge doesn't exist, but to rather leave the mind's eye that it might see for itself. Plato had it right many moons ago. And this one by the guy that wrote The Little Prince, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up the people to gather wood, divide the work and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. So the secret to leading any aspect of education for me effectively and sustainably is in your learning, in your communities with the kids, the parents, the teachers, is to develop true shared understanding and ownership of what you're doing and what works and what doesn't work and why, and having open dialogue about that. And in the meantime, responding to the ministry directives by saying, so why would we do that? And then if you take it back into what you're trying to do, as Derek pointed out earlier, you can make it work for you. And you're very clear, like no one, when Aero comes to visit, they're not going to slap you over the knuckles because someone's learnt well. So if what the outcome of what you do in trying to understand each learner and working with that leads to more effective learning, then that'll be there. It'll be present. It'll be obvious, and there won't be any sort of counting up the minutes. And which takes me back to my first school, where inspector we used to have in those days said to me, there's a student here not doing year 8 maths, not doing 100 hours, not doing 100 hours of year 8 maths. I said, no, that's because they're already at a year 10 standard. So we're now got them out doing work, they're learning in the community and doing this and doing that. And they said, well, you can't do that. And I said, why not? They said, because it's a rule that you do 100 hours. And I said, hang on, are you telling me that I've got to do 100 hours and stop her learning when she's got this opportunity to do that? Oh, well, you better talk to the Board of Studies about it, which I did and promptly was allowed to allow her to do what she was doing. So, focus on what's really important. Thanks to New Zealand for all the learning I've done with all of you. You're my favorite. It's my favorite place to work. And my reason for it, 2 reasons. One is because you do think about your work, and that's my, it's why I love it over there, because you do. I don't know what aspect of your heritage it is. It's probably all the combinations, but you are much more prepared than most teachers and educators to think about your work, and it's always a joy to work with you because of that. And the second thing is, as a small country, you have an opportunity, and this collective is amazing, because you have an opportunity to work together, as this group have already started, to actually form your really strong voice in a really collective, open dialogue way. So if I've been able to contribute to helping you do that, only too pleased to, and hope that we might catch up again in another time.
Thanks, Julia. Look, we are right on time, but I just do want to draw attention to one more question that's come into the the thing, because you answered the question in a circumvented way around sequencing, and I think really put to bed the fact that it's not as simple as that. The other one that's come in, which is a pressure from our...
Derek, wait, Derek, on that. Well, there's sort of sequencing in some things, like in procedural knowledge, for example. I better learn how to hold the golf stick before I have a swing, right? Although maybe I'll have a go and have a swing, and then I'll work out what it is I need to learn. Maybe that would be a good idea. But certainly when I come into the procedural knowledge, I am going to have some sort of sequencing. But anyway, keep going. Sorry.
No, we've got a couple come in, which I'm sure we can run a little over time for those who want to stay, because I think there are two. One of the questions that's come in is again prompted by instruction from the ministry, who are suggesting that children in that lower end of school should only be exposed to explicit teaching. That's what they need. They're not capable of having this other level of engagement that you're talking about.
You mean, sorry, can you see me now? No.
Oh, we can still see you in the little...
okay. I don't know what I've done with the slides, but don't worry. I've took them out of the way. I'm just going to stop the sharing of that, so then maybe you can see.
There you go. You're back again now.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's interesting, because when I watch my 16-month-old grandson, he's learnt an enormous amount, and he hasn't had any explicit direct instruction. Like, so what I watch when he makes sense of his world, and then when he needs to know something explicitly, he lets me know that he needs to know that, you know, and so, and at that point, then I will come in, as Francis was saying earlier, it's actually, what's the teaching moment here? And when it's appropriate, I will use it, no doubt, I use explicit direct instruction, especially when he's throwing food on the floor. So, you know, so the whole point here really is that responsiveness, and that's an absolute nonsense. Young kids, and that's the problem, you see, we get into school, kids are learning with enthusiasm and engagement before school, and they get into school and get stuck with explicit direct instruction, and they get bored silly. And and so, you know, that we're killing natural learning when we do that.
So thanks, Julia. Look, that's all right. One last question, which I wonder if you can give me a Hallmark card short answer to, but it's from Sally, who says, Julia, what has been the biggest change that you've seen over your career in terms of what is called effective pedagogy?
It's come in the schools that I've worked with, that are not the ones I've worked with, but any school, like, I mean, Derek, you know, the education positioning system we worked together on ages ago with CORE, around having the philosophical framework clear, my values, beliefs in the school, having our culture of learning sorted, and knowing the elements that make for a culture where we can learn together, and then having strategies and structures and approaches that actually put into practice what you actually believe, and so, and you value, and then checking in on that all the time, evaluating how you're going against that. So, and I guess that's whoever's the question was, is that basically what I guess I'm saying is, when schools work in the way that I'm outlining tonight, because I've learnt from them, you know, and then I've seen and observed in schools that when they work that way, it's the biggest change in the pedagogy. You can't point it at one thing. Well, hang on, you can point it at one approach, and that's the sustainable work that comes from people working together to develop their values and beliefs, and then enacting them, and then critically reflecting on whether or not that's working.
Thank you, Julia. Look, I'm very conscious we've gone a little bit beyond time, but those last few pearls were wonderful, so thank you. And extend to you, on behalf of the Aotearoa Educators Collective, a huge thanks for giving up this hour to share with us again your insights, and for the slides that'll follow. I really appreciate that. And I'm sure everyone on the call, I'm already getting some great little messages of thank you coming through, Julia. So know that it's greatly appreciated. There's a lot of people here I know you've worked with anyway, so they're passing on regards.
Probably hearing the same thing.
yeah, exactly. So look, on behalf of all of them, thanks very much, and ka kite anō. Have a good evening.